We're going to go even deeper now to hear about on this quest to learn more about higher purpose, and we're going to do that by way of a panel. That panel is going to be moderated by my dear friend Margaret Ryan, who you heard earlier today, but I want to tell you about the amazing people who are also on stage with her. Susan Griffin Black is the co-creator and CEO of EO Products. My kids use their soap for everyone. Anyone have that? They just amazing products that are just so great for you. She co-founded that company with her ex-husband 22 years ago and still manages it with him to this day, which I find fascinating. And they manufacture all of their products in San Rafael, California, so it's all local. Interestingly, she's been a Zen student for 30 years. Suzanne DiBianca is the EVP of Corporate Relations and the Chief Philanthropy Officer of Salesforce. And Salesforce has done a really amazing thing with its philanthropy. They have a program which they called 111, which is that Salesforce gives 1% of Salesforce equity, or 1% of employee time, or 1% of its product back to the community. You can't wait to hear more from her. Matt Perry is the Group Business Director of DDB, an amazing advertising agency, communications, digital marketing, connections planning, and media strategy. And what's really special about Matt is that he was actually the first CEO of Conscious Capitalism Australia. Not the first. They were awesome too, but I loved you most.
Amy's sitting right there.
Oh, there you go. No offense. But Matt was the CEO of Conscious Capitalism Australia before coming to the United States. And our fourth panelist is Jessica Prentice. Jessica is a professional chef, author, local food activist. She's the co-founder of Three Stones Hearth, a worker cooperative in Berkeley that prepares nutrient-dense traditional foods on community scale. And I don't usually like to summarize books on stage in an intro, but her book is called Full Moon Feast, Food and the Hunger for Connection. And the description is, it mythopoetically explores the connections between the environment, human communities, and traditional cycles through food. I just wanted to say the word mythopoetically. Please give the panel a warm welcome.
Thank you. Well, as you can imagine, it was really, really hard for me to manifest such great four people who are so diverse. They literally all have different companies. And in my opinion, every single one of you feels so purpose-led. So I'm hoping today that we really get you to interact and ask questions about this, because my first toss to you, and the microphones are there, make sure they're on when you answer. What led you, you gave me a little snippet that one of your first jobs, you met someone in Safeways and you got a job. So what the hell were you going for? Was it any job, or you just wanted a job? You just knew that person was going to give you the job. What was it? Tell us about that.
Hello. Hi. Good afternoon. Thank you for having me. For somebody who's in the tech industry, this is a great event to be at, and an incredible panel to be on which there's 3 women and 1 man.
Yay!
So thank you. Thanks for having me. Just to answer your question specifically, that story about getting a job in Safeway, it was just mostly, I think, a story of courage. I just had moved here from Colorado and was looking for a job, and right in front of me in line was a very pregnant woman who was saying she hadn't found anyone to take over for her yet. She was about to go into labor. And so I just tapped her on the shoulder and said, "Hi, what do you do?" Looking for a job.
Love that.
And it turns out that she actually ran everything, because that's how small NGOs are, for a really interesting organization that did conflict management, conflict resolution in Central and Eastern Europe.
Right.
And so she just said, "Well, why don't you come in tomorrow morning? I'm desperate." And I think it was a moment of synchronicity and a moment of courage.
Yeah. Perfect. Can everyone hear me okay? Good, thank you. I want to stay with you for a second, then I promise lots of... When I was, before the... when I spoke one-on-one to everyone. Suzanne was like, Margaret, enough of this talk about purpose. Let's just do it. And I thought, great, I love this woman. So what is it then? I mean, that to me, it does take courage to do what you did. How has that led you to where you are today? That same level of let's just do it.
Well, I'm an Italian girl from New Jersey.
Oh, well, let's stop the conversation now.
So there you go. I think really, I grew up in a big family. My mom was a social worker. I was very unsupervised as a child. Very independent. And I just, I love this work. I love transformational work. I love, the notion of conscious capitalism. I love John Mackey. There's so many incredible role models. Yeah. And I think for me, given my sort of independence drive background, East Coast sort of vibe, I like to experiment more than talk. Right. And I think that there is a place for both. There's an important place to be reflective and thoughtful and plan, being sort of plan out what you're going to do. Mm. And, the sort of Sicilian in me takes often I'm just going to throw a bunch of spaghetti on the wall and see what sticks and then do that again. Mm-hmm. So that was sort of our analogy in the beginning when we got the foundation going early was we're a software company. I actually landed in a great place because we're all about the beta. Mm. So we just took that concept into philanthropy and said, instead of sort of doing lots of theory of change work, not that that's not important because it is, but instead of sort of and I was a former management consultant before Salesforce, so I was very good on the organizational development side on sort of creating the right framework and steps and all that. And we just sort of took a different tack and said, let's just try a whole bunch of things and whatever works, we'll do again. And we've just kind of gone in that mode ever since.
Yeah. And is that the evolution of Salesforce because it works like that?
I think so. I think it's, the nature of a software business for sure. Mm. The beta is very important. Especially the feedback part of the beta. So, in the beginning, early days, Ilana is here in the back and used to run the Just Think bus. Amazing, partner for us in the early days. And, we didn't really know what we were doing, but we loved Ilana and we knew she had a great mobile technology, strategy. And so, we tried that in support of her here in Hawaii. We tried a bunch of things after school. We just sort of painted a very broad picture on the canvas. And then, you sort of see what emerges. Mm-hmm. We did this 2 years ago with the sort of emergence of Girls Who Code. Mm-hmm. There was no organization in that space 5 years ago. Now there's like 50. Mm. So we funded the first 15 at a small amount, and then we kind of doubled down the next year.
Nice. So is that, for everyone listening, how does purpose relate to everything you just said? What was it? Was that the motivation behind it was purpose?
Yeah, I mean, what? I think, I sort of joke with our CEO that he's a very good Jew, which I think that he is. And what I mean about that is the Tikka part of Judaism, about really making sure that you are really embedding being of service into your everything. Mm. And so when he started the company, I started Salesforce when there was only 50 people. Now there's 25,000 people. Mm. So he was like, I want to build a new kind of a business, right? That does not make philanthropy and service part of like an afterthought.
Right.
I want to bake it in. I want to make sure you can never take it out, even if you tried 10 years later. And so, he was driven by this sense of purpose on being of service to others. And, somebody who was, raised by a social worker, I think that for me, the purpose comes from the being of service to others.
Yeah, beautiful.
Less about sort of us and what's possible, but more about what's possible beyond us.
So the community of.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Thanks.
Matt, when you and I spoke, we talked about the role you have at an ad agency. And I had an ad agency back in the UK, and I can guarantee you purpose was not the first word that came to mind around why we existed. And so for you in the role you have, I mean, you were part of that conscious capitalism in its early days. So I know in your bones, that's how you think. So how do you support your clients to really deliver on their purpose by the work you do? How does that look in an ad agency? Give us a kind of an insight to how mainstream can do this.
Yeah.
Nice.
I don't think there's an easy answer to that question, in that I think that probably like a lot of professional services businesses, an advertising agency, a communications agency is essentially kind of working at the will of their clients. And that it's not like we're selling a widget or a product. We're selling ideas and we're selling creativity. And so it's often difficult for us to sort of inject the values and the purpose and the beliefs that we may have as individuals. And for sure, DDB has a really kind of strong culture and a strong set of values from kind of its foundation. But to inject that into all of your clients' business is a really tricky thing to do. So trying to find that sort of balance internally with people where you're able to kind of give them a sense of vision, and this is why we're all doing this, and this is where we're going, but at the same time having to obviously deliver on client need is a really sometimes challenging place to be. But I think the reason why I sit here and why I think DDB, San Francisco and DDB as a broader North America group is kind of interested in this space and the people in this room is because I think we are at the epicenter of change in that we've got an audience, generally millennial-driven audience in terms of mindset and attitude, which is kind of driving the need for our clients to change. And we've also got, and advertising has typically been a young, despite I feel like the oldest person in the room often, but it is a young culture, and we have lots of young people, and they are also they've also shifted in terms of the way they look at work. And so we have to find something that meets in the middle and that gives both our clients, customers, and our own people a reason for working for DDB and working with DDB. And that's, I think, probably the reason why we're here and the reason why we're exploring lots of different ways in which we can engage, build purpose, and kind of make sure that we live to those kind of original foundation values. Yeah,
thank you for that. Because even when John said earlier today, he talked about, businesses having this, bad press. I think the session today, kind of hearing from you, how do we change that? I mean, you're all in this room. You wouldn't be here if you didn't fundamentally know you are running your businesses in a way that you would consider conscious. So how do we bridge that? We use a collective intelligence, right? Let's go fix something. Let's go use the room to help us do that. So we'll make that one of the questions. So that's great. Thanks. You have to tell us what you do. You're so diverse in every aspect. Tell us, share.
So I'm really a food activist who ended up expressing my activism through starting a business, co-founding a business, which is a worker cooperative in Berkeley. And I think it came out of, for me, so the book that Dave mentioned was sort of my feeling into what's wrong with our food system on multiple levels. And it really is sort of, you could say mythopoetic, but it's sort of philosophical. And yet, when I finished the book, there was really this feeling of, well, what now? What do you do now that you've critiqued what's currently happening? And for me, it was like, I'm very similar to what the last speaker talked about in terms of Mother Teresa. Like, she doesn't want to go to an anti-war rally. I don't want to spend my life complaining about the food system. I want to spend my life building the food system that I think we need and that I want us to have. And so that's been the last 10 years of, it's a never-ending, ever-deepening spiritual practice to work in a cooperative. It's a business crossed with an intentional community, right? So it feels more than anything to me like a village. I feel like I'm an elder in a village, and that's what I show up every day. And the last speaker was so helpful because it really reminded me, like, in the midst of the business and all of that is human beings who are looking for safety, belonging, and mattering. And isn't that what an elder in a village would help people feel, right? Isn't that my role? And so it was great coaching. It was really great coaching for what I have to show up to every day, because we're incredibly diverse. We're incredibly underpaid. We're in the trenches on the front lines of what's going on in our economy right now, which I think we all can agree is is pretty frightening. And we're increasing this separation between the haves and the have-nots, and we're the have-nots, and yet we want to spend our energy taking care of each other and trying to create the life that we want, even within that context. And so that's what we show up to every day. So it's pretty beautiful, and it's pretty challenging, and it's pretty intense.
Yeah, thank you. Susan, I noticed when the last presenter, Christine, she threw something out about when you grow your company, and as you're growing, as you're scaling, potentially you have a sense of losing your culture. Yeah. And I saw you go, ooh. Tell us about what happened when you felt you lost culture, and how did you get it back, or what happened?
I think that by just reiterating the point that after 10 years of being in business with my current business partner and husband at the time, we transitioned and went through a divorce and then came out on the other side. And our employees were very much with us in that process. So when I think about the support that I had from my spiritual practice of being a Zen student, the whole world sort of came together to help figure out a way to evolve into a new relationship and run the business successfully with our strengths and really support the greater good. And we came out much stronger and successfully, and we're really family to each other. And I think it actually was a cleansing and purification and transformation process that is very possible. And then it also infused our culture with the capacity to have deeper and more meaningful relationships and see our way through tough times, conflict, and resolve it in a way really looking at the greater good and long-term results.
Yeah, thank you. Mm-hmm. And for whoever would like to answer this, so here you are, you're all leaders. How do you motivate, how do you tap into your team's higher purpose? Do you expect them to be aligned to your organization purpose? But what if I'm not? I love what we do, but it's a job. How do you really get to motivate someone to say, hey, you're not truly working in your genius, or whatever word you want to put on it, but how do you get people to tap into their purpose? Who would be open to talk about that? We have 2 mics if you want another mic. All of you can answer, it's great.
Hello. I think sometimes creative kind of places, creative agencies, in the kind of like the sense of you've got people who are literally employed to be creative. That is their job, which is a really odd kind of job. And I don't think I've kind of sussed this out, despite the fact of my literally decades of working in this industry. I haven't quite worked out yet how you manage that, because it's a really hard thing to manage. It's almost impossible to manage creativity. It's sort of an oxymoron. And so the only way you can do it actually is because often we're working on things that aren't necessarily in themselves, always. We're not saving lives often, very often. I mean, that's the truth of it. We're selling products. We're trying to grow demand for something. And hopefully the thing that you're growing demand for is something that people truly need, as opposed to just, we're trying to create demand that shouldn't really be there. And we're lucky. We often work with clients that are in that space. But still, you have to find a way of getting kind of creative people to think creatively and feel like they're part of something bigger than simply just, we've got to turn out another ad for another product. Right. And that's where I think the kind of the piece where you need kind of authenticity and transparency and honesty and sort of truth meets a sense of it. The previous speaker, Caroline, I think her name was talking about kind of needing to set a vision. Like if you set that path, this is where we're going, this is where we've got to take this brand or this audience or this product, and then make that exciting enough and tangible enough and real enough that people can kind of get behind it and go on that journey. And then really the only thing left then is just some clear direction around, well, what are we, what's the brief? What are we trying to do? And then the space to let creative people be creative. And it's a much easier thing to say than it is to do. It's actually a really hard thing to do because at the same time you've got the pressure of the client kind of wanting and demanding.
With the deadline and
and budgets and all those kind of things, which is very common in every business. But anyway, I don't know if that's entirely answered the question, but the point I guess I was trying to make is that, to make creative people feel like they're part of something bigger, you have to set a vision, and then I think just be authentic and transparent around how you want to get to that vision.
Yeah, thank you. She's got 2 microphones now. That's just greedy.
Yeah, well, but one at a time anyway. So, right now I've got 2 microphones. So I think this is for us. This is a very present question because we're a worker cooperative. We're inviting people to be owners. So we're growing the ownership from employees. So 5 of us co-founded the business. We currently have 19 worker owners, and we're hiring people in as dishwashers and cooks primarily. So these are people who are used to being exploited because they are, and we're saying you actually can share in the profits and you can become an owner, but we take them through a candidacy process as part of that. And this whole question of purpose alignment is huge for us because we don't want to share the business with people that we don't feel alignment of purpose because we're very purpose driven. And so it actually is part of our candidacy process that people, we just have a very simple Venn diagram, the company's purpose, which is explicit. So that gets written in there. And then we ask people to try to identify their purpose, even if it's just right now, because, a lot of folks we're hiring are millennials, and I don't necessarily expect they figured out what their life's purpose is yet. But at least identify something that feels like it's true for them at that moment, and then to look at where's the overlap. And so then, in the Venn diagram, then there's the overlap, and to try to figure out why are you here? Because we're now moving from the fact that you're here from a paycheck into something else. You're at a different level of ownership. You're actually going to share the profits of this business. And so, it's part of that process. And it's interesting. I mean, it is really tough for people to come up with something that feels like a purpose for them. And, probably would be a lot easier for knowledge workers or creative people. But, we don't have a system that in any way encourages an education system that encourages people to think like that. Like, what is my purpose? What am I here on the planet for? And it's probably the first time that they've ever been asked, to think about that. So it's interesting.
Yeah. I'm glad you're asking it.
Yeah, and I was just going to take a slightly different tack on the question, tell an anecdotal story, which was there was a couple of years ago where the San Francisco Business Times every year does this Women in Business thing. And unbeknownst to both of us, another executive at Salesforce, another female executive, and I both went through an interview process. And one of the questions was, what is your hiring strategy, right? And neither one of us knew that the other had answered the question in the exact same way. And our answer was, hire people significantly smarter than you. And so I called her after and I thought, God, that's sort of crazy and interesting. And people really probably think there's a lot of really dumb managers at Salesforce as a result. But the point of it was that we run I actually really, really, really believe it. And so does she. And I think so do all of our executives. And the point is that as it relates to purpose is, we run a training called the multiplier effect. So we find sort of high potential employees in the company and we put them through this training, which is the multiplier effect, which starts with the notion of you're brilliant. You are already brilliant. And how can we empower you to empower the people around you to find their brilliance and their purpose? And so it's been a really interesting experiment. And one of the things that we learned early days as we stood up our volunteer program, which a lot of people sort of aligned to purpose, is freedom. right? Kind of meeting people where they are and giving them space to do what they want and to explore and find their purpose. So we didn't sort of say, here's like the 5 things you can do and get paid time off. So we give 6 paid days to all of our employees to do volunteer work. We would say, what do you care about? And then we'll help you find something. And maybe somebody had lost a parent to a disease, or our former CFO like had a thing, he couldn't stand children, like bring your kids to work day. He would run, but he loved dogs. He loved animals. And he always felt really bad about not liking children because we did a lot of work in education, but we met him where he was, right? And then he found all these other animal lovers in the company, and they made a huge difference with a couple local foundations, both technology and sort of a labor perspective. So I think the key for us has been this democracy, this, you're already brilliant. Let's meet you where you are, and let's sort of help you explore and find your purpose. It doesn't matter if you're a developer or an accountant or a marketing person, you know, sort of being able to have the 6 paid days, and the opportunity to have people to help you find your purpose has really paid off. And then just the last quick thing I'll say about that 15 years later is one of the things we learned, when we went back to look at the data, because I run an international volunteer trip every year, is when we went back and looked over time at who those people were that took advantage of the 6 paid days, even if they didn't exactly know what to do and they did a whole bunch of different things. Our high performing volunteers tracked to promotions faster, performed better on their performance reviews. So what we learned as a company is actually it's an early indicator of top talent.
Yeah.
So we really keep an eye on it.
Yeah. That's a great metrics, actually, isn't it? To actually study that. That's brilliant.
Yeah.
I have a thought that Christina, the last session, where she talked about safety. You know, if I am this young person, I've never been asked before, when I felt you gave me a roadmap, you kept me safe because I can go all over the place, but I haven't got a clue where I'm going. But that's okay too.
Right.
So it was set up for success, is what it felt like.
And you're with a whole bunch of other people that don't know where they're
exactly.
going.
But it's there. Beautiful. Susan.
Well, we have a very diverse group because we manufacture everything in San Rafael. And there we have about 105 people working together under one roof. And we're determined to sort of stay under one roof or very close by so that we can continue to see each other and get up from our desks and walk around and talk to each other. And what I found over the past 22 years, we still have some of our original employees that started filling bottles when we were in the city 20-some years ago, who are still with us in San Rafael. And I think they have such a strong sense of belonging. And what we say is the quote, work is love made visible. And then we actually do our very, very, very best to model that. So we care about people, we care about their families. The reason that we started our company is and manufacture in Marin is so that I was never more than 10 minutes away from either one of my kids. I never missed a basketball game. I never missed a performance. You know, my priorities when we started were very clear, which is also the reason that we've never taken private equity or venture money. And we've grown in a, very up and down sort of pace. And in the past few years, year over year, solid growth. And I once asked John Mackey what the difference is between a nonprofit and a small business.
What did he say?
And he said, nothing, because, that's really where we were for so many years. And then, so the thing now in terms of scaling and getting bigger, the essence of why we want to do that is because we're engaged with so many wonderful people and their families that is the motivation to keep it going and to keep learning together and for people to figure out how to grow there and what it is that they want. So, we make coaching available. We teach English, so we just bring in as many resources, and we're open to people, submitting therapy and seminars and so forth as an expense so that they can learn.
That's brilliant. Talk about taking care of the whole body rather than just a piece, isn't it? That's beautiful. I'm going to ask one last question, then I'm going to open up plenty of time for you guys to ask questions. In this moment, what's your higher purpose? Or what does it mean to you? What is it and what does it mean to you?
In this moment, I sort of come from a place of, trying to get out of my own self, and sort of be other focused, right? So I think that's always my guiding principle about purpose. I think in this moment, as it relates to the political sort of environment, the immigration, the fear, the division that's happening in our country, I feel like my purpose in this moment is to help people figure out how to mobilize. And so, I'll come back to the doing part of myself, right? So that's why I had the ACLU over at Salesforce last week to sort of talk, and the San Francisco Foundation to talk about, if you care about immigration, this is what you can do. If you care about climate, this is what you can do. So I feel like I want to leverage my network and my commitment and my purpose and my passion, not necessarily to serve others in the way I sort of traditionally have, which is more direct one-to-one, is more about how to help people mobilize for productive, unifying action.
Beautiful. Yeah, great. Fantastic. Matt? Yay. Thank you.
I think, so on a personal level, it's obviously, being a better person, better husband, better father.
What does that look like, Matt?
Well, currently with 2 kids, so I was going to say under the age of, but like a 12-year-old who is starting to become a teenager, and a 9-year-old who is already a teenager. Just trying to figure out how do you make these people not turn, how do we get these people to end up in the right place? So that's a big focus. Then on a professional level, I was doing, before I got up on stage, I was, doing the research into the DDB story, and there was something that I'd heard about when I was interviewing, which I thought was really interesting, and I think it kind of reflects perhaps, maybe certainly for me personally, but maybe for other people in the room, that one of the kind of the important leaders within the organization at the time wrote something called the 4 Freedoms, which I can't remember all 4 of them now, but somebody in the room will be able to tell us later exactly what the 4 are. But the first one I remember is freedom from fear. And I think that, that resonates because it's absolutely critical in an organization like ours that if there's any kind of fear, that the reptilian brain kicks in and takes over, and creativity essentially just stops in that environment, whichever business you're in, whether it's an advertising agency or any other business. But so I think freedom from fear is kind of trying to be that sort of leader that exhibits that freedom from fear would be something that I would like to be a lot better at. I'm not saying I'm good at that at the moment, but something that, as professionals, as leaders in organizations, if you can manage that piece, you actually opens up so many other
at least when you can start, being aware that that's where you're at. I would say even that part opens up some space to change from it, doesn't it?
Yeah. And and I think unfortunately, to your point, that we're currently in a cultural context, which is, the breeding of fear is not just permeating our political system, but it's permeating. We've got clients saying we're not going to do this because we're worried about a tweet. We're not going to do that because what does it say about us? So that's, you've got fear creeping into many aspects. And I think all of our roles, and I think particularly DDB's role in this is to break free from that fear and to create opportunity and create. You saw that, if anyone watched the Super Bowl ads, the big brands and some of the small brands who've got the money to run ads in the Super Bowl, which is obviously a bit unique. But a lot of them are about that, about overcoming fear and overcoming boundaries and hurdles that seem to be putting in our way. And I think that's our industry has got a responsibility to kind of keep those doors open and keep pushing forward.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. Thank you. Next up. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm just sitting with that. Freedom from fear is so relevant right now for all of us. In terms of my own purpose, I feel I feel a sort of strong sense of my sort of overarching purpose in life. And I think, for me, so much of it has to do with feeling like we don't live in a culture that honors our ancestors. And we live in a culture that's very obsessed by what's new and what's next, and is extremely attached to what I call the myth of progress. And I feel like my purpose is to remind myself and then to remind others of the wisdom of our ancestors in a whole bunch of realms. And food was sort of where I started, and that's really what a lot of what my book is about. But now that I'm in an organization, I'm really interested in what do sustainable cultures have to teach us about how to organize. And because we're actually an incredibly young culture, very, very young culture. And even just if you give us the full 500 years or whatever, but then, then actually what we're inhabiting now is, as John was saying earlier, we didn't have cell phones 15 years ago. And so everything is just accelerating so much. And I'm really interested in what's universal about being a human being on the planet, and how can we sort of step back from the sort of the insanity of the moment and connect with our timeless humanity and draw on that wisdom and listen to what our forebears have to teach us, which I think is hugely underappreciated and misunderstood, ununderstood. It's not a word. Yeah.
I like that.
Thank you.
I think that kindness is a very underrated virtue and way of behaving. And I think that kindness can permeate everything in life, including business. And I also feel like female leadership, whether it's females leading or males leading from a more female place, is really necessary. And I'm really such an advocate for women-owned businesses. And the experience of raising children and having our own business and really wanting to be a good parent has so informed leadership that is wholesome and healthy and open and curious, because, they're the future. And I feel very committed and responsible to continuing in the best way possible. So thank you.
Beautiful. Well, I think, it's obvious you've got 4 fabulous leaders sitting on this stage. What about asking some questions around leadership? And, done. 1 back there, 2, 3. Oh, here you go. Sorry, excuse me. Please allow me. I love to throw this. Nice catch.
All right. This is mostly for you, Suzanne, but if anyone else has a perspective. So I heard you talk about high potentials, and I do a lot of work in the corporate space, and that seems to be a heavy focus. And I'm wondering, how do you kind of balance the focus on the high potential people versus the other people that are in the organization? What's kind of your frame around that? How does the company focus? And do you differ from the company in terms of where to focus?
Sure. It's funny when you sort of set it back to me. I think high potential is really a relevant term. What makes somebody high potential? And I, as a parent, live with a middle schooler and a high schooler myself, one of whom I would call high potential, the other who I would call lazy. And that said, I actually try to, in a way, I support the high potential and the lazy just the same, right? So I think it's sort of stage based. So for us, as in the sort of corporate context, it tends to be the self-organizing people, the people with high executive function, the people that have will go way outside their job description to fill a hole, like see a hole, fill it, raise their hand to do it. I think that's what we talk about when we talk about high potential, because those people tend to make good managers, actually, and support other people in their development to, take areas sort of outside their career. So that's what we look for. We look for the people that go outside their job role, who organize teams around volunteer events. And then we also support the sort of second category, at least maybe that's the difference in my approach, which is more in helping them find their way and helping them find their voice. So we have sort of training programs kind of for different personality types or people that are in their careers in a different way. But I don't, I sort of feel like everybody's high potential at the end of the day. It's just sort of like, how are you best supported to find that in yourself? I don't know if that answered your question, but that's how I think about it.
Yeah. Well, I bring this up just because it seems like there is a heavy focus on high potentials, and it just seems to me, it's starting to occur to me that there's so much untapped potential in the people that are not going to be the most aggressive, the most competitive, and so I was curious about your perspective on that. And is that something that like a sales force sees or is in alignment with, and or because it seems to be a heavy focce on high potential.
Just a little bit.
Yeah.
Perfect. Only because I know there's other people who'd love to chat. This chap down here, could he have the mic? And I think I heard you say there's different ways in which to bring the best out of people, is what I thought I heard you say, yeah. Thanks.
Hi there. So my name's Rob Murray, and the question is, I'm a supply chain consultant, and what happens is, as I'm really interested in sustainability and moving people towards that consciousness, and one of the things that happens is people come and they say, I have a specific problem to fix. How do I fix my inventory control? And how do you also weave into that? In order to do that, you have to build relationships. You have to build long-term partnerships. You have to build teamwork. So people come with a specific problem. They think that there's a technical answer, but it's really a behavioral answer. It's a change that has to happen in the culture.
That's a great point. Is there a question in there for someone?
Yes. So I'm not sure who's best able to answer that question.
Who has the most stakeholder?
I think we're a relationship-based company, and as John speaks about, and Conscious Capitalism speaks about stakeholders, it's all about relationship. And so if you start with that premise, and the way to build relationship and honesty and integrity and and kindness and respect and how we behave towards each other, then when problems or challenges arise, you sort of have that framework in front of you to help sort of navigate whatever the challenge is. And I agree with you. It's never about saving 3 cents on it's about is the relationship serving both of us? And what's happening around that. So, yeah, to your point, I can see that it's really about relationship and not about the exact, whatever the issue is, the tip of the iceberg.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
Thank you.
Great
Would
answer.
you be
Thank you.
willing to get to Barrett?
My name is Barrett Brown, and I'm curious, what's one practice or activity from each of you that you would attribute to having supported the greatest growth of your own consciousness?
Meditation. Zen Buddhist meditation. Especially silent, days of silence.
I would sort of agree with that. I would add physical activity for me. I'm like wired in a sort of tighter way, so I need. Sometimes for me, running can be very meditative. But that's personally. It's also true. We had our CEO, who's amazing, had basically turned one of his homes into a retreat center for Thich Nhat Hanh last year and his monks. And as he was sort of healing from an illness, and so he brought that practice into our company. So we could go at the 6 o'clock morning meditation. And so now we have mindfulness rooms on every floor in our building. And we had it at our big users conference. So I think that it's personally, I think, true for him, also for me, although sometimes it shows up differently. but we've really tried to bring it in as a practice to our organization also.
I'm really bad at meditation, but I think meditation is a really good thing to do.
I'm really bad at
You read it. You
I
read
really
that
want to be
somewhere.
good at it, but I'm not very good at it. So my approach was more kind of, I suppose, research. So I just spent as much time as I could meeting people. This is back in Australia, but meeting people that I thought that I could learn from, and then I kind of turbocharged that by crazily volunteering to be involved in conscious capitalism, and that just exposed me to all sorts of amazing people. So I don't know. I mean, that, and then from that, I kind of, that's really started to get me woken up, I suppose, to probably more about what could I be doing better? Did I need to evolve? And then I think things like meditation techniques and other deep mind work that you can do on yourself, I think then that sort of evolves and becomes, it becomes in your sphere of vision. And I think it starts to knit together and piece together in that way. Well, that was the way that it happened for me.
Guys, because of time, I'm sorry. I need one more question over there, and then I think we're popping off for lunch, I believe.
Sorry. Hi, Matt. This question is for you. So as we all know, the studies show that consumers would prefer to buy from companies that give back in some way, shape, or form. Why do you think that more companies are not weaving that into their marketing message all the time versus sort of creating these socially conscious campaigns for certain times of the year and burying it in their About Us section like, oh, look how great we are, we do all these great things, but then they don't put that out there to the average consumer. They sort of force the consumer to be, vigilant and look for it.
That's a brilliant question, and the bane of every sort of marketing person who works in this space is kind of life, I think. And I mean that in the sense that it's really frustrating that when so I'll give an example of Unilever. So Unilever can be criticized for all sorts of things that they do, especially if we went back 10 years or 15, 20 years ago, they could be heavily criticized for their impact on the environment, their impact on people, etc. But what they recognized is that, is that it?
I told you it was going to be like the Oscars. If you overspeak, the music starts. Sorry, mate.
Is that like 1 second warning?
Yeah.
Sharp.
The lights go out if you keep going.
I'll be super quick. I think what they did is they recognized that trying to be perfect from the very beginning is just impossible. But if they don't start doing something, what hope have we all got? And I read a really interesting quote in a study that I was reading the other day, which there was a quote from one of their guys that said that I think they call them life brands. I think they call them their sustainable brands. But the sustainable brands now represent 50% of their revenue. And so if a business like Unilever can recognize the value of not just doing this stuff, which is the most important thing, but then communicating it, it then inspires their customer base to kind of come on board and join the movement. It inspires their own people. I don't know if you've ever been to a Unilever kind of conference or where their employees are a bit like, Whole Foods employees, I imagine, would be. And they're kind of into this idea of actually creating a greater good. And I think that's infectious. And communication plays a huge role in getting that story out. I think some of the brands that don't do that are fearful that because they're not perfect and they come out and say, well, we've done this one good thing over here, that they'll just get criticized because of the other things that they haven't yet got to. And that's a real problem, I think, because I think there is this sort of crazy expectation that they've got to be perfect from day one, and it's just not reasonable or feasible.
Yeah, it's too hard. Fantastic, lovely. Round of applause, please. Thank you.